And we're going to get started. We're recording, everyone, just so you know. I want to welcome everyone. I'm Pam Barbie, Chair of Graphic Design, and I thank you for joining the Graphic Design Department's Artist Talk for today. We have Ryan Stalvey. You want to give a wave, Ryan? Ryan says he always wanted to be that cool ad man in the suit and fedora, even though in all honesty, he had little idea of what that person did. He just knew that he could draw and he wanted to look like him when he did it. Okay, so he may not always be wearing a fedora, he's not today, but he's built an award-winning career that's taken him to success, not only in magazine design, but also in photography, painting, and illustration. His eye as a designer influences all those creative outlets, and he brings that sensibility to us today. He's a graphic design graduate of the University of South Carolina, and he is one of the most recognized magazine designers in the country, with more than 200 individual issues to his credit. He has served as executive editor of the high-end national outdoor magazine, Sporting Classics. He was a co-founder of the deluxe golf magazine, The Golf Sport, and currently serves as creator-in-chief of Elysian magazine, a quarterly portfolio format women's luxury magazine. He's a winner of 6 national awards for the publication design. And in November, he was awarded the coveted first place to 2021 FOLIO Ozzie Award in the most competitive class, Best Design Single Magazine Issue in the Consumer Lifestyle Special Interest category for his design of the May-June 2021 issue of Elysian magazine, winning over People, Parents, and Magnolia, among other notable publications. So please join me in welcoming Ryan Stalvey. Yay, hands up, we're all good.
Well, I want to thank you guys for having me, and Pam and Jen and Dinah for coordinating all this. I guess what I'll do is I'll kind of give you a history of how I got to where I am. It's not an extravagant story, but it's my story. And then I'll take you through some of the work that I've done, and finally finish up with a trip through a current issue. And I'll kind of give you an idea of what's going on in my head when I'm putting together a magazine. And so anyway, and then we'll open the floor for any questions anyone has. So I kind of got, even as a kid, I was just in love with magazines. I always liked magazines from as far back as I can remember. I really cannot even remember how far back that would go. But I was always, anytime I could get my hands on a magazine, it didn't matter what it was. It could be my grandmother's magazine. I was always going through them, and I just liked them, and especially the men's magazines. And, you know, I had some uncles that had Esquires and old issues of Argosy and True. And of course, my grandfather and dad were subscribers to Outdoor Life and Field and Stream, Sports Afield. And, you know, I just loved going through those magazines. And I really couldn't explain to you hardly, you know, why at the time. But looking back, it all makes sense for some reason or another. But what I really liked most about those magazines were the ads and the way they were put together, particularly in the slicker magazines, the Esquires and the illustrations from the old Trues and Argosies, and of course Outdoor Life and Field and Stream. And the big three in the outdoor industry back then had a lot of illustrations within the magazines, and that's what I liked most. And then I just kind of like the way it all came together. And so that kind of gave me the interest that I had in graphic design, and led me to the University of South Carolina. So I graduated University of South Carolina in 1995, and as I was enrolling, it was a real dynamic time in the publishing industry, print industry. Color was becoming cheaper, so more magazines and newspapers were going almost full color at that time. The computer, of course, was at the forefront of everything, but it was new. They were huge, they were expensive, programs were expensive. You'd have to go to seminars really and workshops to be able to understand how the program functioned. And so there was a difficulty to get to a spot to where you could actually learn much about what was going on the back end of things, because it was all changing from paste up and hand drawn to that. And the illustration side of things was changing too, because illustration was, as color was coming to the forefront. And during that age in the 90s and early 90s and into the early 2000s, illustration was kind of looked on as old fashioned. And, you know, the magazines and ads and everything, when they use illustrations, they were going to a more graphic type illustration. So the hand drawn stuff that I loved from my youth was kind of being outdated at that time. But anyway, so I started my career, my years at University of South Carolina. And again, the computers were expensive then, they were huge. And so while we had a nice computer lab with access to it, it was limited. And at the same time, as we were trying to learn these programs and learn how to design on a computer, so were the professors who were teaching us. So we kind of hand in hand walked into that new realm, and it was really a great learning experience from that standpoint. I'm not sure I would have learned as much if I hadn't had to help some professors figure things out. And so that kind of put me through college. I got a quick job after I graduated with a newspaper in South Carolina, the Florence Morning News. And I just loved it. I mean, I made a comment in an editor's letter within the golf sport. And I just said, you know, I'm a blue blood, not by wealth or status, but by the printer's ink that's coursing through my veins. And that's kind of the way I felt my entire career. There's just something I always liked about publishing, whether it's newsprint, newspapers, or magazines. And so, you know, I really just loved it. And we had some really good page designers at the time, and they were knowledgeable. They were going to a lot of workshops. And of course, back then we had Quark Express. And it was a quirky program for putting together layouts. But anyway, we you know, they would go to seminars. They'd come back, tell me what they would say, what they learned, and then I would go to some workshops myself. So I picked up on things pretty quickly. And one of the biggest things I did, and I've done this my entire career, I guess that's part of what I started from youth, is just going through everything. I mean, you know, back then we didn't have the internet, so everything wasn't at the, you know, touch of a finger. You had to do work to find back issues of magazine, and the local libraries, the school libraries, even the university libraries were really limited on what you could look at. And so, but I did that all through as a kid and through college, and then, you know, at the Florence Morning News, they had a good archive, and they were subscribing to a magazine called How. And I'm not sure whether How is in publication today, and I probably should have checked it out before this, but it was a great magazine back then, and it was just everything that was modern, everything that was current within design, whether it be advertising design or publications, but, you know, predominantly print. It was in that magazine, and they had a design annual every year. It would be, you know, 200 to 400 pages, and just chock full of the world's best design in print. And so I would just go through those magazines, and I'd look at them on my lunch break. I'd Xerox pages and take them home and study them. And, you know, I really began to train my eye towards, you know, what some of the best practices for design and some of the cutting edge, you know, layouts that were being done then. And I started to incorporate that to what I was doing at the newspaper. And, you know, pretty quickly within the first year, I went from doing the back end pages of the newspaper, the inside pages and wedding pages and stuff, to the front page, lifestyle display pages. And really, they gave me a lot of freedom with it. And I've been fortunate that with my whole career, I've gotten a lot of freedom with pretty much every position I've ever been in. And, you know, I just really had a lot of fun more than anything else with it. I started doing some of the things that I'd seen, and you know, it's one of those things where, you know, you push it around, and you know you're doing something really good with it, and that's kind of the way that those designs became. And I got some early success with the group newspaper, Thompson Newspapers, the group that owned those newspapers. Won some awards with them, and won some awards with the South Carolina Press Association. And then I had a series of fashion page designs, lifestyle page designs that I've submitted for. It was a pretty big award at the time. I don't think it's even in existence now. It's called the Atrium Award. But they highlighted 7 winners, and it was for excellence in journalism within the fashion industry. And the award ceremony was in Atlanta. It's probably still one of the biggest moments of my life. So we went to the award ceremony, and everybody was in there. And of course, they say, okay, you know, we're going to go to each table, and you announce where you're from, who you are, where you're from, and what newspaper you work for, and what your circulation is. And so they went around, and it was, Detroit Free Press, circulation 800,000, Chicago Tribune, circulation 800,000, Dallas Morning News, Palm Beach Post, circulation 500,000. And then it got to me, and I said, I'm Ryan Stalvey from the Florence Morning News in Florence, South Carolina. My circulation is 35,000. And everyone literally almost kind of dropped put their glasses down or a spoon and just kind of looked over at me. And I was like, yeah, that's me. So anyways, that was a big moment for me. And it really was what launched my career. And I'll show you some of those pages. I actually have those pages from that submission that I'll show you in a little bit. But so that took me, that really gave me a lot of opportunities. And so some calls started coming for jobs at bigger newspapers in bigger cities. But I had married my high school sweetheart. We were about to begin a family, and we really didn't want to move to a big city and start over at that point because we were getting ready to start a family. And so we decided to kind of stick around. Shortly after, Sporting Classics had heard about it and seen it in the state newspaper. And they had a position, and they called me up for it. And of course, I mean, me having a sporting background, knowing almost the full history of the big three in the outdoor industry: sports field, outdoor life, field and stream, and having a huge collection of those to boot, it was a pretty easy job to land. And they were, those guys just loved to have me on board. I loved being with them. It was a real old crew. The magazine had been founded 20 years before I started there, and I started there in 1999. And so I came on board with those guys, and I had so many ideas. I'd seen so much in the past and whatnot, from a hunting magazine standpoint, a sporting magazine standpoint, and a man's magazine standpoint. There was a lot I wanted to interject. And I think I just finally wore them out that first week until they finally said, okay, if you want to do it, do it. If we approve it, we'll do it. And so I redesigned the whole magazine by the first deadline, and they approved it. They loved it, and we put it out. The advertisers loved it because it really was a change from what they had been doing. It was redesigned from cover to cover. It was a complete rehaul. It didn't look like the same magazine at all. Even the masthead, fonts, logo, everything was totally rebranded. And we got a lot of success with it. We ended up winning the Ozzie Award that year for Best Magazine Redesign. And that too, just kind of set me on my way. And so I was with Sporting Classics and just really enjoying it. I mean, one of the things about working for a magazine like that, when that's what you do on your free time, when you're an outdoors kind of guy and you go to work for a place like that, it's an absolute dream job. And it was. And so I was thrown into a new world of that, which was to a very high level, because it's for the sophisticated sportsman. It's the well-to-do, wealthy demographic, and the world's finest destinations: Land Rovers, Beretta, Holland & Holland, all the top of the top within the sporting industry. And so it was a realm that I wasn't 100% familiar with, but one that really it was so wonderful to be in that world. And I got to partake in some trips. There was a lot of perks with it, to go on to this place, destination wise, and that place. And so I was there for probably about 5 years. And the thing about it was, again, they're old school. The owner was in his 60s. The editor was in his 60s. Everything was done the old way. It was just a completely old mentality of how to run a business, how to handle everything. The owner had built the building. And so he built the building. He built 2 buildings beside it that he was leasing out. And so when he constructed the building, he put all the windows on the outside edge, and then he put all the offices on the inside edge. So on the outside edge of the building, you had the bathrooms, and you had the storage room and the foyer and the conference room all had windows, and everybody's office was a 10 by 10 square room with no windows. Well, he was asked about that several times, and he would always say, I don't put windows in offices because if employees are looking out of the office window, they aren't working. And that was that old school mentality that they had when it came to doing everything. But the walls had been closing in on me, and I needed an outlet. And so I kind of approached them. And the thing about working for a mom and pop business like that, even when you're doing well, you're just barely making ends meet. I mean, you're doing good. You're staying out of the red is a great thing. And they were successful, had a lot more success once we kind of retuned things. And so things were going pretty good. frankly, I probably could have used some help on everything that I was doing, but I took it all on. And the thing about it is, it's coming from a daily newspaper where I'm meeting a deadline every day. I mean, you have some deadlines that, a week out, 2 weeks out, but you have a daily deadline every single day. And so coming from that world of a daily deadline into a world where I'm now on a bi-monthly deadline cycle, it's, it was very easy to manage time. And it was one of those things that I was able to hit the ground running with it. And while again, probably we should have had two people doing the job, I was easily handling it myself at that time, because again, I was organized, I was efficient from the newspaper, and everything that was going on there was just easy to kind of maintain. And so I got a lot of respect for that. And so I kind of approached them about, I said, I'm going on destinations. I have a good eye. I've seen some of the best photography. I said, I want to take a camera with me and see what I could come up with. I said, I know I really can't get a raise. I said, but what if I traded out advertising for a camera? And so the editor said, sure, let's do it. Sounds great. So he worked a trade deal out with Nikon, and he got one of the brand new first, it was the first edition digital cameras that Nikon made. And I got 2 generations removed from that, which was the next to last version of the SLR camera that Nikon made, which was a film canister camera. But I rolled with it anyway, and learned it, and was happy to get it regardless. And just kind of tinkered around with that a little bit. And my sister, who thinks I walk on water and can leap tall buildings, she had a friend who was getting married, and she didn't have much of a budget for a wedding, and was just wanting someone really as a favor to sort of shoot the wedding for her. But I know how that goes. I mean, you shoot a woman's wedding, and you mess up the shots and don't get the photographers for them, and you've ruined her entire life. And so anyway, there was a lot of pressure with that. But anyway, my sister told her, said, my brother's doing it, so maybe he could do it for you, or doing photography, and maybe he can do it for you. So anyway, so she approached me, but I said, listen, I said, I'll do it. I said, but keep in mind, I'm very new to this. I don't know how it's going to turn out. Never done anything like this before. This is a favor. And she said, that's fine. She said, whatever you can get me. So anyway, so I shot the wedding. It was just a lot of fun. I really enjoyed it. I really enjoyed setting up the shots, and did a lot of research, of course, before I went towards it, and had a shot list already prepared. And but the thing about it is with a film, film camera, I didn't know what I was getting. I had no clue whether anything was going to come out of it. And so I, had everything developed. Surprisingly enough, there was very little spoil, and really nice shots, and she loved it. And she told her friends about it. And next thing I knew, I'd booked two of her friends, and by the end of the year, I'd booked 10 more weddings. And that's kind of how I got started in wedding photography and event photography. And so that kind of escalated over the next few years to where I was doing a lot of it. And I got to the point to where I'd stepped away from sporting classics to work from basically a freelance standpoint. I'd go in there 2 or 3 times a week, but the rest of the time I'd do it at home. And again, when it kind of would take 2 people to replace what you're doing, they will let you kind of do what it is that you need to do to kind of sow the wild oats, so to speak, or whatnot, when it comes to getting the creative juices out. And so anyway, so I was going in 2 or 3 times a week for that, and doing a lot of wedding photography. And over the course of all those years, I did wedding photography for about 4 years, and I shot over 70 weddings, and had kind of established myself as one of the Southeast premier wedding and event photographers. And it was a very, very demanding business, demanding from a standpoint of, all your weekends are tied up, because that's when brides are married. That's when they're off to do their portraits. And so, it's one of those things where I was doing sporting classics during the week, and on the weekends I was doing the wedding photography, and it was just a lot of work. And life kind of threw me a curveball at that time, as it does. And my wife we just had our second kid, and she was really young. And my wife was diagnosed. Anyway, my wife had a pretty serious condition come about that required a major surgery, and it was really touch and go. I mean, she's fine now. Everything went great with her, but it was life and death at that time, and it just put everything in perspective for me. That I really had to step back and take a look. And I said, if I'm going to do this, the thing about it is, when you're doing wedding photography, you're showing up when the bride shows up Saturday mornings, which is generally 10 to 11 o'clock. And you don't leave until she leaves, or the last guest leaves in the wee hours of Sunday morning. I mean, you're looking at 2 or 3 o'clock, and most of the time it's a 2 or 3 hour, 4 hour drive to get there, get back. And so your weekends are totally occupied. And meanwhile, the rest of the world revolves around a weekly schedule where they're off on the weekend, which included my wife. And it just put everything in perspective for me. I said, do I want to have a career like this going forward where, every Saturday night at 11 o'clock, I'm going to have a bunch of drunks hang off of me saying, hey, take my photo. Hey, take my photo into the wee hours of the morning. Or do I want to be a family man? And I kind of, I said, it really, it hits hard when you think you're going to lose a spouse. And I decided, it was a no-brainer. I said, I'm a step away from wedding photography and go back to sporting classics full time. And so I honored all my outstanding obligations and stepped away from it. And really, it was a good decision. I never looked back on that decision. It was one that I know was the right decision at the time. And so I went back to sporting classics and was back in there full time. Of course, those old school guys were more than happy to have me back in the office again, where they could see me every day for 8 hours a day. And so I went back to sporting classics, and it wasn't long after that, again, the wall sort of closed in. And I did all my career. I've done a lot of illustrations, for the newspapers, for the magazines, and sporting classics. While I was doing some, I would do some setup photography stuff for them. I'd do some illustrations when there was a story I needed to illustrate, and I felt like I could pull the illustration off or the shot off rather than farming it out. So I had some creative outlets, but I was just getting burned out. That 10 by 10 office was just closing in more and more every day. And we had a young guy that came on board at that time, and he was on the editorial side of things. He was coming in as sort of a editorial assistant to the editor, and he just really didn't like it. He came on board. He was there for a little while and said, "Man, this isn't working out for me. I'm gonna do something else." And he said, "Why don't we do something together?" And I said, "Well, what do you have in mind?" And he said, "If you could do any kind of magazine, what kind of magazine would you do?" And I said, "Well, to be honest with you," I said, "I've thought a lot about this." I said, sporting classics during the time when we had some recessions and whatnot, they never hurt because the demographic and the readership was a high-end, affluent readership and demographic that, wasn't affected by that. Well, neither were the advertising base, because that was their clients. And so I said, but in the golfing realm, there's not a magazine like that. There's nothing that focuses on the art, the heritage, or romance of the game of golf. What's really great about golf? It's all about 20 ways to fix the slice. What's the 10 best new drivers? It's just, really, a bunch of how-to stuff. And I said, I think that the golf industry would, I think a golf magazine like that's more of a literary type magazine and a little bit of a hybrid would be a good magazine. And he loved it. And he said, all right. He said, I let me see what I can do about getting some backing for us. He said, let's do it. And so we walked away from Sporting Classics, which my wife was not happy about. But it was one of those things where, it's like, again, the walls had closed and I had to do something. And this opportunity sort of came about, and we thought it was a good one. And so we went into it headlong. We just stepped up and just jumped into the middle of it. But it was a bad time. It was bad timing because not long after we started it, the first few issues went really well. And then all of a sudden, the golf industry just fell out. It fell apart. And, all the mom and pop companies were going out of business, which that was pretty much the only advertising we could get was from the mom and pops, because the major equipment companies and big golf courses and major apparel companies and everything, they were already on contract with Golf Digest and Golf Magazine, who had hundreds of thousands of subscribers. They didn't want to mess with us. And so it was all we could do to get meetings with those people. And we really couldn't land anything. Again, the only clients we could land from an advertising standpoint were the mom and pop businesses, but now they were going out of business. And so, the golf courses were folding left and right, and that industry just really turned on itself. And if you didn't have the means to sustain it, you were gone. And that included us. We ran out of resources. We just didn't have the manpower between two of us. He handled a lot of the business side of things and finance. I sold the advertising, I did the magazine, and handled pre-press. And then we would write 80% of the magazine. He would write 40%, I'd write the other 40%. And we made it 7 issues. And among those 7 issues, we submitted for best new magazine. We actually won recognition for that with that title. But we only made 7 issues, but we gave it a great run. And looking back, it was just, I can't believe we did what we did, to be honest with you. And so we ran out of time and resources and everything else. And as I was sort of wrapping up everything with the golf sport, the owner of Sporting Classics called me up. I guess he kind of got wind of it. I'm sure he did. He didn't allude to it, but he just kind of acted like he was calling me out of the blue. And he said, "So how's things going?" I said, "Well, we're wrapping up, trying to figure out what next step's going to be." And he said, "I've seen your magazine," because we were at the newsstand, and yeah, I guess he was picking up copies. And he said, "It's a good one." He said, "Why weren't you doing that for us?" I said, "Well, I could." And I said, "You guys had me in a creative director box." I said, "All the thing you would let me do is design the magazine, in accordance to whatever the editor said we needed to have in it." And he said, "Well, how about we change that? Why don't you come back and you can be my executive editor?" He said, "Now you still got to design the magazine." He said, "But you're going to have more of a say so in what goes in it." And I said, "That's great." And so I went back to Sporting Classics, and we really did some special things those last 3 years that I was there. Turned it into much more of a hybrid type magazine. I started resurrecting a lot of old illustrations from the Argosy and True magazines of, that I never really saw when I was young. But, again, the internet at that point, I had access to see everything. And so I was finding these illustrations and bringing them back to the forefront again, rerunning them, giving them new life. And it really just created a really special men's sporting magazine with Sporting Classics, that a lot of the other magazines weren't doing. You Outdoor Lives, the big three, again, they were stumbling. They had a masthead of 90 people, and they had to pay them. And, it's one of those things where, a lot of magazines were going out of business because advertising was starting to pull their money away from print publications and print and put it in digital. But the publications and the vendors on that side just had no clue exactly what to do for them. And so there was a lot of answers that just weren't out there at that time or being addressed. And everybody wanted digital, but they didn't know what they wanted from it other than numbers. And the other ones really had a tough time delivering that. And that's when you saw a big fallout of magazines. And that would have, that was, around 2016, right in there. And a lot of major titles did follow during that time. But Sporting Classics, we kind of established ourselves into one of those big three roles, which was a huge thing.
Ryan, do you have some of those examples you could show us?
Oh, I do. I'm gonna show them once I go through everything. I'll go through a sampling of past work.
Okay.
And so and so anyway, we did a lot of really great things with that publication and brought it to the forefront of the outdoor industry. And turns out the owner of Elysian, her husband was a subscriber to Sporting Classics, and she was having some. They were a fledgling publication at the time. They'd been in business for, I think, 3 or 4 years, and they were struggling. But they were backed by an advertising agency. She also owns an advertising agency, so they had the wheels under them to do something. They just didn't know what they were doing in publishing, and so she was wanting someone to come in and do a consultation. And somehow she ended up, I guess, she saw the magazine somehow and ended up reaching out to me. And it wasn't too far away. And so I said, "Yeah, I'll drive up and give a consultation." So I came up and gave a consultation. There was a lot of things that, again, it was an advertising agency that was trying to put out a magazine, and there were some things that needed to be changed from that standpoint. And so I gave my consultation, and I left. And before I could make it home, I got a call from her, and she said, "We want you to come on board." And she made it worth my while, and I ended up leaving Sporting Classics to go a men's sporting magazine to go into a luxury women's lifestyle magazine. So it was a total new realm to move into. And so I went there as creative director, but with also, knowing that I was going to have to deal with a lot of internal things to kind of get them on the right track from a publishing standpoint. And so I went there with that, and I was there for a couple of years. And about 3 years, and they went through a number of editors. They just were not what we needed. And she called me about a year and a half ago, and she said, "Listen, I want you to do the whole magazine." I said, "Well, I'm doing the whole magazine." She said, "No." She said, "I want you to do the whole magazine." She said, "I want you to do what you were doing with Sporting Classics." I said, "Okay." And she said, "So you're going to be my editor in chief, and you're going to be my creative director." And I said, "Okay, that's a lot." I said, "Now I don't have to relinquish some of this other, internal stuff that I've been doing to focus totally on the content and getting the magazine and everything else." And she said, "That's your job." And I said, "Okay." And from that standpoint, I got to move to the forefront of the magazine, to where, and I had, a lot of input and credibility when it came to my suggestions for content and what we're going to do from a story lineup standpoint and what visuals could work with this and why we shouldn't do that. But again, I was creative director. And now when she moved me into this new role, which I'm not going to take the editor-in-chief title. I said, well, if we make it a hybrid title and we call it creator-in-chief? She said, love it. So I took that title, and from that standpoint, I started work. You hear the phrase thrown out a lot, content, curating content. Well, when I came on board as this, it turned everything around. So rather than curating content, I curate aesthetics. So I find the very best aesthetics out there, and then I'll build the content around that. And so we started working backwards. So now I can actually see, and I did this a lot with sporting class, and definitely with the golf sport, because I was in total control of that. But where I can see the end result before I start. One of the problems that I had with Sporting Classics early on, old school editor, it's always words come before the images, and I'd argue with him. I was like, no, that's not the way it works. I said, you got to stop them. They got to see it. Were they getting stopped by a headline? I'm like, no, they're getting stopped mainly by the size of the headline and the treatment of it. I said, but the artistic elements of it is really what's stopping their eye. And so we argued about that nonstop before I came back to Sporting Classics again. And so anyway, so with Elysian, I really got to, again, focus on the magazine from a backwards sort of standpoint. So again, I find the very best aesthetics that fit the theme, that fit the seasonality of it, and then I work my way back from it. And it's been pretty successful. And so that's kind of the history of how I got from where I started to where I am now. And I guess now I'll show you some examples of that. Let's see if I can share. Okay, can everybody see it? Pam, we good?
Yeah, we're good. If you want to hit
Okay.
Command L, we'll see the full screen.
Sure, here you go. Okay, so this is some of the layouts that I did from
Okay, here it comes here.
the morning news, and this was okay, and these were part of that collection that won the Elysian Award. Some of them, I mean, they look more simple than they were, especially at that time to put together. The Wild Things and the 150 Years of Evening Wear Elegance. Those two, that's a montage. Those are photo montages. We got for 150 Years of Evening Wear Elegance. I had 150 slides, and so I really had to go through it, piece everything together to create that montage. Same thing for the Wild Things, which back then was a much bigger challenge than it is now to put together. And so you can see, for 1990 something, those were, especially in small town South Carolina, those were, a little different sort of front page looks. These are some illustrations that I did when I was with the newspapers. We had some tabs that came out, City Mom and different things, and I do the illustrations for the covers or whatnot every now and then when I felt like I could do the illustration. I only offered it up when I thought I could pull it off. Sometimes I didn't pull it off, but a lot of times I did, and that's kind of what you see here. It was a lot of fun. Mostly cartoons and editorial cartoons, the caricatures and whatnot is what I did when I was with the newspapers, but it was a lot of fun, and in the end, I actually accumulated a lot of those, and this is just a few of them. And then this is a golf sport. So this was my self-launch. It's a hybrid magazine. It was, the art, the romance, the heritage of the game of golf, but I also included a lot of other elements to it that really made it a nice gentleman's type magazine. And, again, we won a recognition for that title. Some more pages from that. It was a lot of fun to do. And so then that took me to Sporting Classics, and again, Sporting Classics. A lot of this is from the later years in Sporting Classics when we did become more of a hybrid type magazine again. That's just a real good sort of genre to take on. You can be a vertical magazine where you're all fishing or all hunting or all golf, but when you can be more than that as a magazine, then I think it's just you reach more people. And that's the same thing we're doing. Same thing we do with Elysian today. I mean, you'll see it when I go through it. It's a fashion magazine. It's a lifestyle magazine. It's a Hollywood type magazine. And Sporting Classics, I mean, it was an upscale hunting and fishing magazine. It was a men's magazine. It was National Geographic. It was just a lot of different things that that really built a nice readership. There's more of, you can see here where I've resurrected a lot of old illustrations to complement the magazine, which, the thing about it too is the readership of this magazine, the readership of the Gosport being a little bit older readership, they had seen some of those illustrations growing up. So it was real nostalgic for them to see that sort of thing again. And those are some illustrations that I did when I was with Sporting Classics, a couple of covers and some internal stuff, more stuff than that, but this is just several of them that shows a little different style, but a lot of fun. And more, from Sporting Classics. Again, you see that variety, and like with the illustration for the world down there. I mean, that was probably an illustration that came from an old man's life, or True magazine. Some of the greatest illustrators that ever lived during that time, they were incredible. A little more of that there. And I mean, you can see a lot of the old Esquire type treatments and old Playboy type treatments and True and Argosy treatments within the way I laid things out, but it just it gave it a real masculine feel, and it fit, and we were bold, and we were bolder than any other hunting and fishing magazine, and we were doing things that no other sporting magazine was doing at that time, and that's how we were able to move up in the rankings. And so I think, yep, that takes me to Elysian. And so I'm going to go through a full issue of Elysian in just a second, but just kind of give you an overview of the way the magazine sort of looks. When I came on board, now the only thing I did not redo with Elysian magazine was the covers. She'd already established a templated format that she wanted with the position of the heads, the way they were going to be, and the logo treatment or the masthead. So that's the only thing that didn't change. So when I came on board, I had to work with what I had from that Elysian masthead. I was not allowed to change that because she wanted, going forward to have that continuity. Because, whether you look in the inside or not, that's one thing, but she wanted every magazine that she put on the table to be one continuous body of work. And so if we'd have changed the logo, the masthead, the treatment of the covers, it would totally mess that up. And so I stayed true to that and tried to build a magazine around that, because I did redesign Elysian in my first issue before the first deadline as well. And so that takes us through here. It's more of Elysian. You can see it's a fashion magazine. It's an architectural digest. It's a lot of different things all in one, but it has a nice cohesion to it. And again, really bold. That's one of the things I've done pretty much through my entire career is I've been really bold with my work. And again, working for smaller shops, you have that, you get that freedom. And I've been very fortunate with the publishers that I have worked with to allow me that freedom to work within that space. So now I'll go through a full issue of Elysian, kind of tell you a little bit about how I went about redesigning it, what I do when what I'm thinking when I'm putting together an issue of Elysian. So there's components that I like to have in every magazine I do. It went all the way back to the Golf Sports, Sporting Classics, and now this. I like to have black and white components. I like to have nostalgia. I want something that's dynamic. I want something that's very modern. And it's one of those things where there's certain aesthetics that I want in every single issue, and then I try to build a magazine around those as I'm collecting them. Now, again, keep in mind, Elysian is a quarterly magazine, so it's seasonal, very seasonal when it's quarterly. And so this issue that we're looking at now would be a spring issue. And so everything that I put into the magazine, I want to make sure I don't put a snowy scene or snowy location into a spring magazine, and vice versa, a beach into a winter magazine. Very careful about that sort of thing. But we kind of gotten to a point with Elysian to where I'm fine-tuning it to the degree that so we sell 20 ads for Elysian magazine. That's it. They're basically strategic partners. And those 20 ads may be single pages. They may be 2-page spreads, which count as 2 pages, but it's only 20 pages of advertising. The rest of that is my book to work with. And I've started working with the advertisers to find their ads to the issue, to whether it's the color scheme that I'm going for an issue. Back in the fall, I did a black and tan type issue. For the winter issue, I did a silver and gold. And I try to get those advertisers to fine-tune their ads towards that, which just makes a nicer magazine. Everything complements everything. You really feel like you're in one cohesive group of pages. And then the other thing, I mentioned it in the interview, was my first job in high school was as a disc jockey. And one of the first things I learned was, you don't go from a slow song to a real hard song, a real, hard rock type song. You step up to it and then you step back down from it. And that keeps the listeners listening to the radio. Same thing with a magazine. I like to step up with my designs, and that kind of leads the eye, that leads the reader through the magazine. Now, one of the things that was missing from Elysian when I started it was they were just kind of all over the place from the inside standpoint. I mean, there was all kinds of different fonts. There was just, I mean, you didn't know what you would get from one page to the next, but it wasn't from a good standpoint. And they had ads mixed in everywhere. There was no true feature well. So a feature well would be this, normally the center of the magazine. I think Vogue does it in the back of the magazine, but it's uninterrupted pages of feature coverage. It's your most visual, it's your most important elements of that issue. And it should be uninterrupted. We call it a feature well. And so they didn't have that. It was all over the place. There would be a feature up front, a feature in the middle, ads in the middle of the feature. It was just all over the place. And so one of the first things I did, I said, listen, we're going to go columns or departments. We call them departments with Elysian. I said, we're going to go to departments, and then we're going to go to the feature well, and then we're going to go backwards from there. I said, and then that gives you, of course, from an advertising standpoint, you can sell upfront advertising for a bigger price than you sell advertising for the back of the magazine. And so it's just a better way of putting the magazine together that every big major magazine does. These guys had no clue about. And so that was one of the main things that came in that really helped to simplify the magazine. And then what I had to work with starting this magazine and redesigning it was the Elysian logo, which is that font is a Helvetica new thin. And so that's what I was working off of, and that's all I had. And so again, I just built a magazine from scratch. Again, this is a spring issue that we're looking at. I work with Kim Casas to make sure we have a nice spring ad in there. It's also our art issue. And so you'll see a lot of art and architecture. It's our art and design issue. And so all the advertising, for the most part, that aren't fashion related, correspond back to our theme. And so it's a nice, colorful. I thought this would be a good magazine to show you guys from an art standpoint. And I actually hand select the paintings that they're going to put in these ads and the photos that we're going to put in these ads. So I work really closely with the advertisers to make sure this magazine is fine-tuned as much as possible. And so that takes us up through the table of contents page. It's kind of a repeat of the masthead. You see, I like to use a lot of big numbers. Again, I've always been kind of bold in the way I design things. And so that's kind of what you're seeing there. Those are the features in that part. We get to the next page. Those are the columns or departments. And then that kind of gets us going into the magazine. Now over here on the left-hand side, it's one of those elements that I really wanted to brand the magazine with, and that's that Helvetica new E. And so I brought it into the masthead, blew it up big through our masthead list of employees and whatnot to the left, threw some photos over it, and that kind of made a nice element to start the magazine off with. And of course, that ad on the right is hand chosen to go beside that to help complement it. You'll notice how the art flows into the top left, the top right of the E up there. And you'll notice that with a lot of my designs. I had an art class. It was a sculpture class at South Carolina. And I can't remember the professor's name. I'm doing him an injustice by not saying it. But anyway, one of his theories in teaching us was if you were a person and you were in a go-kart, how would you get through the sculpture? And I kind of, somehow I just kind of started doing that same sort of thing within my layouts to lead the eye through from one page to the next and lead it through the layouts. And so you'll see that too as we go through. Publisher's letter, the ad on the right, again, I chose the painting to go there. Nice little pull out, goes to the first department. So here's a little bit of nostalgia and a little bit of, where I like to, an element that I thought was important to have in an art issue like this, you got to have masterworks. And so that's what I pulled into this feature, which is on beauty and art. And how the muse and how it sort of affected a lot of these artists, and how the Mona Lisa was thought of as a beautiful woman, the Venus de Milo and whatnot. And so that's our first feature coming in. So you see, already it's like an art book. I mean, you're getting some masterworks and a number of them. That's one of the things. One of the things I was not able to do it. I was able to do it with the golf sport, but not at Sporting Classics. Was really take my time to put things, to have the space to really let features stand as big as they needed to. Sporting Classics was a lot of stuff crammed into a little bit of space. With the Elysian, I have a full palette. I'm only doing 6 to 7 departments, and I'm doing 4 features every magazine with 20 ads and over 180 pages, 84 pages. I can do a lot with it. So I can have big departments, whereas a lot of magazines like Vogue, you'll see it on a column may only be a page and a half, some of them. And so anyway, so here's my masterwork section. So you get some great, just incredible art. And then we go into the architecture column, which is in every issue, which is kind of brings a little bit of the architectural digest sort of look to the magazine and feel. And we go through that. And what you'll see too, as I'm going through this, is from a color standpoint, everything flows. You're not getting shocked. So I'm not only trying to lead the eye through from a design standpoint, but from a color and hue standpoint as well. If you'll notice the honeycomb sort of effect that's up here, when we get to the next photo, it's over here. And that's part of my planning. And so what I'll do when I'm designing the magazines, I'll do the first department or first feature. I'll print it out, put it on a wall. I know what that one looks like. Now I know I've got to do something different. I'll do another one. Once I get 4 or 5 up, I know that I got to start moving them around and doing something with the next ones to complement that one. Or where, if I'm missing this sort of dynamic element to a layout, then I know I have to do it at that time. And so it really gives me the opportunity to make sure I'm covering everything I want to do from a design standpoint within a magazine. So let's keep going. Oh, I'm sorry. Let me do an Apple L here. All right. So this is our food and dining column. This is on Ultraviolet Restaurant, one of the most expensive restaurants in the world. Great visuals, very artistic. Those backgrounds change as you eat, which changes the way the flavor of the food, or it changes the flavor of the food as you're eating it. So that gets us through that. You'll see I'm very, very simple with my usage in initial caps and font selection. I think that's important. So all this is Helvetica new that you've seen so far from initial cap standpoint. That will change up in the feature well, because the feature well, again, is the special part of the magazine. You'll see how the magazine will change once I hit that feature well, and it's special at that point. Lots of big visuals. When you start when you curate aesthetics, there's photos that speak for themselves. You don't need anything else. And you'll see a lot of that within these pages too, just like this. I mean, what more can you say than what's there? Here's where I get a little, here's the Vogue aspect of the magazine, the fashion aspect of the magazine. It's also very artistic on what they were doing with this collection. Go through it, simple font, but I blow it up and pull it across the page, and all of a sudden it's very simple components, but it makes for a very interesting layout. A little nostalgia on the right-hand side with the Elsa Chaparral. Goes into this. You can see how the hat on the left is looking into the contour or the pose of the person on the right. I mean, the pose of the person on the left is juxtaposed to the woman's hat on the right looking into it. It kind of flows across that. Real artistic jacket there. More from the collection, real simple. Again, there's not a lot you need to do. Visuals say a lot, and we're in a world now where, people aren't reading. So much. Everything is a short read now. So I try to give a lot of that in a magazine. A lot of big visuals. You don't have to take a lot of time to look at a Elysian magazine, but when you've been through it, you feel like you've seen a lot, and that's sort of my goal with it. That takes us to the shopping piece. Thought it would be nice to have, we've got some architects in it. We have artists, we have fashion designers. What we do coffee table books that are some of the most expensive artistic coffee table books or art coffee table books that are done. And that's what that selection is right there. Some of those books are $6,000. And then that takes us to the feature well. So you'll see a big jump here. So you see my folio at the bottom and how I treat that. And as soon as you hit the feature well, all of a sudden those page numbers come alive. And so it's one of those things when I was doing the redesign of this, I've always liked fooling around with page numbers, but it really just kind of was an epiphany to me. I said, rather than, starting every layout off with a blank page, if I know I'm going to blow numbers up to, 250 point size, and they can be on top of each other, side by side, all the way across the page, full page, everything else, then I am never working from scratch. I'm always working with an artistic component to begin each layout. And that really, I don't know, it just really fired me up when I started working from that standpoint. It's a lot of fun once I hit the feature well, and I'm designing a feature well for this magazine. And so anyway, so this is going to take us through, this is the nostalgic aspect, the old Hollywood and black and white aspect of the magazine. So we'll go through that. And then I'm real careful when I'm choosing images as well, to go with even something like this to make sure and get something that is really nostalgic. There's so many Marilyn Monroes to choose from, but I wanted to choose something that was a little different. And you notice with this one, if you look in the background, you'll see some other artistic art prints and all that are framed in the back. And that's why I chose that photo, because it goes with the art issue, simply because of what's in the background back there. That's why that photo was chosen. Again, playing around with the large page numbers. Again, that shot, to me, she just looked like she could have been posing for Picasso. And so I said, that's the shot for that 2-page spread. It speaks along. Get over here. So here's a photographer type component that I threw in there, which is what is it called? A contact sheet of Marilyn Monroe, which added a really nice artistic aesthetic to this feature. And I wanted that variety too. So I wanted to come in here. With this issue, I wanted photographers. I wanted ceramics. I wanted artists and whatnot in here. And so I tried to cover almost every genre of art, and architects as well, design. And so it takes us through here. So you can see the page numbers are a lot of fun. There's a nice Andy Warhol. You have to have that in there if you're going to do something on Marilyn Monroe in an art magazine. And so that takes us to this feature, which was, she's a photographer who puts herself in her own work, and it's just really great fit for the spring issue. Flowers, it's artistic. She's a photographer. I needed a photographer, and she was perfect for it. And different treatment of the page numbers there. Different treatment of the page numbers there. I don't know. I get kind of crazy with it. It's real, nice and elegant, like her work. And again, and when I go to color with the, you'll notice when I go to color with the page numbers, and when I go to color within body copy and whatnot, it's generally only, I'm generally only using that gold, the Elysian gold, black and white. So again, it's very simple, the components of everything, but the way they're being used, it makes it look like there's much more to it. And I think that's a big secret to design. It's almost like with painting, more is less. We can do Leslie Williamson, a photographer who takes photographs of artists' studios, like this is George O'Keeffe's home. And so another thing I wanted to get into this issue that's really important to me is I like a photograph that you can look into and you can look around and see things in it. Kind of like the Marilyn Monroe one that we were looking at earlier. I like to have some photos in the magazine where somebody looks at them and they can spend time looking at them to see what's in the background, what's under that chair, different things like that. And I thought it was very important to show that in an art studio as well. So you see a little bit of that here, and you'll see a lot more of it later. So we continue to go through the feature well. Very simple treatment of the initial cap. Again, there's one that I could spend 15 minutes looking at that photo, at everything that they have on their shelves and under the tables, and the rasp that she has, and it's just a fun image to look at. It goes through there, and then we get to the Netherlands feature. A little different treatment there, but it kind of the two images work for that. So I said, hey, we'll give it a shot. Now I changed the initial cap up just a little bit there, and that's actually the same font I'm using as the page number. So still keeping it very simple from a font standpoint. I'm not throwing a bunch of different fonts in there. I will throw a scripty font in. You'll see that come. You saw that in the Isabel feature, but that's it. I don't mix it up too much from a font standpoint. Again, I like to keep it very simple. Just really, nice dynamic page. That's simple. Same thing there. Again, choosing things from the Netherlands that actually complemented the art and design theme of the issue. And the color scheme, you'll see, there's a nice springy painting up there at the top, or towel up at the top. And another little different treatment of the page number and the way the caption runs on that. That's tulip feels. But it looks like a painting. Kind of takes us through that. The reason why the photo at the top left was chosen was because of the apron that she's wearing. And of course, you got to cover the Dutch artist if you're doing something in the Netherlands. Another one that you could look at for a long time to see what's going on. And we bring a little bit of food in. The magazine really has a lot of different elements in it. Different usage of different treatment of the page numbers there as we wrap up the feature well. And that takes us to the Inspiring Women section, which is interviews. It's really kind of simple. I do some different things. I didn't like that cue turned the other way, so I flipped it around. You still know it's a cue, and it still works. But hey, when you have the freedom to do it, you roll with it. So this is just going to take us through Inspiring Women interviews, and they're chosen by the publisher. Spring ad, architect ad, and then we go back to the studios. I was mentioned before, I really like to look into an artist studio and see what they're doing, what's going on behind them and whatnot. And I wanted to make sure I had that in here. And in this department on Mind and Body, which was the healing power of art as therapy, I really had an opportunity to do that. So I was really selective at the images that I chose for this, and I'm really happy to get those in there. That's probably my favorite spread in the whole magazine. Even though it's paintbrushes, a bunch of globby paint, I can still look at it for 15 minutes. And then we're looking into a studio again and wrapping it up with that. And we go into a little piece. The National Art Museum for this, Women's Art Museum for this, was very peculiar. You couldn't, on how you could use the images. And so I really had to be, they couldn't bleed. They had to have, had to be positioned in a certain way and whatnot. But it wrapped up the magazine and it finished it off nicely. Next to the end of the magazine and last page. So that's that's kind of how I go about doing what I'm doing. And can you guys still see me? And that's why I do what I do. So
Yeah.
that's a lot of background on me. So that's it. So I guess I can open up to any questions now, which I think I've occupied the entire time. So.
Oh, you could stop sharing if you want, and then we can. I'll see.
Okay.
If anybody wants to.
I'm sorry. Yeah, here we go.
No, that's okay. Anybody, if you have a question, you can put it in the chat. We only have a few minutes. They have to get back to class, but anybody have a question? You want to put it in the chat or just raise your hand, just shout it out. We're good. Give you a minute here. What I want to know is, where do you have a source of photographers, or where do you get all those images?
It's all over. With Sporting Classics, the hardest thing was finding the old illustrations. That was done by the illustrators during really, they were done during the 40s and 50s, early 60s. And, a lot of auction house perusing, museums and whatnot. And same thing with photography. It's just, most of what I do is compile. Again, starting from aesthetics backwards sort of approach to
Right.
curating. Yeah.
Anybody, you can put it in the chat. I know you guys have to get back to class and
I have one question.
Go ahead, Chase.
Just a personal question though, like which one do you think is more of your favorite design element? Would it be rather like your bold typography elements that you've got going on, or like the photography that you utilize?
It's hard to say. I guess it would be, a little bit of one, a little bit of the other. Again, I really love to just let a photograph speak for itself. But at the same time, when I can be dynamic with the layout, then I guess I'm expressing myself more with that. So, it all comes together in the end. And
Yeah.
So,
All right. Thank you.
thank you.
Oh, thank you. Michelle's got to run. Fantastic, she said. Thank you, Michelle. We understand, have class. But no, I loved the presentation portion of the work. Unexpected. It was awesome. Yeah. And that what issue is that the issue that's coming out in March, correct?
That'll be the spring issue.
Okay. It is beautiful issue. And I love the aesthetics, and I love your design elements and how you use, I love the font. That's like what is that? Caslon? No, it's like a comeback font or something. Great work. And it looks like you had a good time at the sports publication as well, without all that work.
I've had a great career. I mean, it's one of those things where I've never worked for a major magazine, so to speak, but the ones I've worked at, it's really been fulfilling. And because I've gotten a lot of freedom and I've had a lot of input, and I've got to incorporate a lot of things from a creative standpoint outside of just design to them. And so it's been a great career. I mean, it really has.
Well, it looks like it. What's next? So, where's it? Well, we're going to say goodbye. I know they'll give everyone a break to get something to eat before the seniors meet with you. And I want to thank you for your time, and we'll connect. I'll connect with you at, maybe you and I want to connect around 1:25.
Okay. Thanks, Pam. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.